I clicked on an ad on Google for a pair of shoes, and I counted, and it was 75 seconds or something before like the main product image showed up. And I was like, you guys know better, I'm sure. One of our values is we never shame the customers for a bad implementation. Like, everyone is doing their best, but in the absence of in-house ownership and very clear goals and targets around site speed, it's something that often falls between the cracks between.
One of the most important facets of any business is customer service. In business, you are not only selling a product or a service, but an experience. Providing exceptional customer service and developing real relationships with your clients means increased sales, retain customers, new customers via word of mouth, and a positive reputation. You're listening to the Focus on Customer Experience podcast. Benjamin Del Grosso gives you the ins and outs of one of the most underlooked aspects in business today. Improve your customer service and watch your business skyrocket. 2, 1. Now, here's your host, Benjamin Del Grosso.
Hello and welcome to the show. Today we have Shawn O'Neill from Vancouver, BC, Canada. He is the founder of SpeedSense. And from what I've gathered from our little conversations, he can get it all down to the milliseconds of your conversion for increasing web traffic and sales and everything for your website. Maybe I'm not explaining it the same way he would, but he's basically a genius when it comes to this kind of stuff. And today we're going to talk about the user experience on your website. So, Shawn, why don't you give us a little bit of a introduction as I just kind of went through everything?
Yeah, it's good. I love to hear how different people introduce me. I wouldn't have used the word genius, so I appreciate that one. Yeah, I run SpeedSense Web Performance. We help brands increase the speed of their website, which in turn increases conversion, revenue, user experience. So a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about today. We do this mostly with enterprise tier e-commerce brands, places where there's multiple in-house teams responsible for managing the website, building the site, running marketing campaigns on there. And then someone who's typically a store manager, as you would have in a real brick and mortar equivalent, you'd have a digital e-commerce store manager. So that's typically like the dynamic and the folks that we work with and support.
Yeah. So basically, you're not typically doing it yourself. You're more educating the staff of some of these enterprise, like these bigger companies or other companies, so that their staff is aware of what they need to do to speed up the website, right?
For sure. Yeah. Because, you could buy a fast website. You could go and having a quick high performant website will last for so long. But having a team that knows how to build a fast site and keep it fast can go a lot further. So we focus more on uncover the issues on the site that they have now on their current stack with the current team, and then upskill the existing in-house team, or maybe it's an agency, to action those findings and then track the gains against their competitors and their SEO rank and things with Core Web Vitals as they roll out those changes.
Yeah. So user experience is a very big thing. So how many times, just talking to listeners here, how many times have you gone to a website and you're sitting there and you're waiting for it to load? It takes too long. And what do? You leave. You go to another website. You know what? I'm just going to find somewhere else to buy it now. That's kind of what you do. You want to make sure it's fast so that those potential customers don't leave.
For sure. Yeah. And during different segments of the page load lifecycle and a user's journey on your website, there's a different threshold for the amount of frustration that someone's willing to tolerate, basically, before they abandon your brand. And if you've just spent, I don't know, $100,000 on an ad campaign and users are landing on your website and it takes 60 seconds to load. Like, I was just at a physio appointment moments before this call, and I clicked on an ad on Google for a pair of shoes, and I counted, and it was 75 seconds or something before like the main product image showed up. And I was like, you guys know better, I'm sure. One of our values is we never shame the customers for a bad implementation. Like, everyone is doing their best, but in the absence of in-house ownership and very clear goals and targets around site speed, it's something that often falls between the cracks between teams, which is really common with a lot of user experience stuff. It's like not a what's the word? Functional, non-functional requirements like sustainability is one as well, but there's these ilities in software definitions. So scalability, reliability, availability. This is like the site stays up. If you hit a lot of traffic, the site can maintain, uptime. And performance is one of those non-functional requirements in that you wouldn't typically type it out in your acceptance criteria for a ticket, or if you're working for an agency, you might not spell out, every page needs to have the largest contentful element rendered in 1.5 seconds. That's very rare that someone would go to that level of detail. So we help focus on that and uncover that, because there's just an endless number of things that anyone running a website needs to focus on.
Yeah. So what a lot of people who are probably listening don't realize is there's a lot of like little code all hidden behind all the images and everything that are on the pages, right? And you kind of know how to read that code and how to make things quicker. Like, for instance, my website, there was a challenge with Core Web Vitals, and you and I were just kind of throwing things back and forth. And you even pointed out, like, well, this is the problem. This is this little thing there. And I thought I had some sort of an idea, but you just knew how to say that it's changing all the sizing while it's loading. And it was causing these challenges, which was affecting the user experience. Because when somebody's looking at it from their mobile phone, the images on the screen are actually jumping up and down while it's loading. And I'm sure people have seen that happen, where it's like something is and everything keeps moving around while the screen's loading. And it just doesn't make a good user experience. So what is some of the key things related to the user experience for a website that I guess you drill down on or you focus on?
Cool. Very good. Thanks for that excellent setup, because I was going to talk about that anyway. So in the last few years, we started SpeedSense. I was a consultant and a developer for many years. I led front-end dev teams and things like that. So I've always had this obsession, painstakingly to some of my managers and coworkers, around site speed. And there's 100 different ways in which you could measure the speed of a website. There's so many different metrics, like how long the server is taking to build the response, how long the browser is taking to parse the HTML. There's like how many files are down. There's 100 different ways you can measure the speed of a site. And a website may have 10 or 100 or 100,000 different URLs that make it up. And so over the last few years, while we've been working, Google has been evolving this definition of the core web vitals, which I alluded to a moment ago. And I'll just explain that a minute for listeners, because I like that they've focused there's a set of 3 metrics, and I'll talk about those. But the way they've selected them is they are UX centric performance metrics. So things that are most related to the user experience. How long a server takes to build a payload may or may not have any impact on how it feels to the user. How many bytes in images may or may not have any impact. So the 3 core web vitals that Google has defined are largest contentful paint was the first one, which in layman's terms is the time at which the biggest thing on the screen gets drawn. So if it's like a product page, like I talked about a moment ago, maybe it's the hero image of that product. If it's a homepage of, Safe Drive Solutions, it's the Safe Drive logo, or maybe it's just looking over your shoulder here, like imagining that banner was a website, we see a big picture of traffic. So maybe that photo would be the largest contentful image or element. So that's the first of the 3 core web vitals, largest contentful paint, the time at which you draw the most relevant thing on the screen, and relevant using the share of the screen that it takes up as a proxy for relevance. So the biggest thing. The next, and they're not in any particular order, but the next would be the one that we talked about, cumulative layout shift, so CLS. And this is how stable are the elements on the screen as they load. The things pop in at the top and push everything down. And like you alluded to a moment ago, we want to keep this at 0, essentially. We want to make sure that when something loads, it doesn't move after that. because the user may start interacting with the page before everything is rendered. And I'm sure we've all experienced, you've hit a news site or something and you're halfway down the page, and then 10 screens up, something you can't even see anymore, like 10 viewports of scrolling up, another element loads or an ad loads really late, and it pushes everything down and you lose your place on the page. And so that can be frustrating at best and potentially derailing of the UX at worst. Like if you're trying to, I don't know, submit your taxes and you're about to click the submit button, and then the submit button is right next to a cancel button, and something loads above and you go to tap submit, and at the same millisecond that your finger touches the glass, you hit the cancel button because the whole viewport shifted. Like some of these actions can be just really destructive to the goal you're trying to accomplish as a user. So trying to minimize CLS, get it to 0 so that things, once they show up on screen, don't move anymore. And yeah, for Safe Drive Solutions, we'd noticed that the logo was coming in a bigger size and then get resized once the CSS loaded. So CSS is just like style sheets. There's 3 different files that make up, or many different files. I'm not going to go that low level, but
oh yeah, there's lots of stuff.
I'm sure anyone who's listening has heard of CSS. If not, then you can ping us and we'll do a deep dive episode on that. Yeah, okay, so that's the second of the 3 core web vitals. The third is first input delay. So this is meant to measure how long between that millisecond when my finger touches the glass or the screen, or you click your mouse down, until the CPU is able to respond to that input. How much lag is there right there? So, again, we've all probably experienced hitting a button and then waiting for it, and then finally it responds, and you're like, okay, I wasn't sure if it was working at all. Sometimes you get like people hammering the button, can't tell if it's behaving or not. And this is happening because the browser that you're using to view that web page can only really do one thing at a time. It's what's called single-threaded. So it can either process JavaScript or render things on the screen or respond to user input. It can't do any more of those. It can't do more than one of those at a time. And so we want to make sure that the ideal delay between the time your finger hits the glass and the time the CPU can respond to that input is under 100 milliseconds, so that it feels like one continuous interaction to the user. So that's a third of the core web vitals metrics, first input delay. That one's the easiest to sort of, that seems to be, this is an evolving set of metrics. And I would wager that is the easiest one for most brands to hit, and not many brands are failing that threshold. And so it's likely that that'll be revisited in the future with there's some new experimental metrics that they're playing with now that include like, okay, other than just the CPUs available to respond, how long until we actually rendered the response to the user? So, it's all work in progress.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch base on what you were talking about there, about how someone's trying to click on something because they're waiting for it to load. And just kind of a little tidbit, when I first started learning WordPress a few years ago, I actually built it and I thought like, oh, I did this great job. And I thought I did amazing. And then I used this program somebody put me onto. It's called Hotjar. And what happened is I saw all these people clicking on stuff that other websites are usually clickable. Mine wasn't. So people were coming onto the website, clicking things that they thought would be, they weren't, and they were leaving. I literally could watch this in real time. I think about 5 or 10 minutes after they left the website, go and watch the recording and see them clicking and try clicking like 5 times, give up and leave. Yeah. So that's like kind of the other part of the user experience is if you don't have things that are clickable that most good websites have, you're losing customers from that as well. Is that something that you kind of look at or drill down onto as well, or?
Mm-hmm. For sure. There are certain patterns that over the years in web design and web development have emerged as expectations in the user's mind. Just like the floppy disk icon means save, even though, a lot of people have never seen a floppy disk in their lives. Most of the current users of the internet have probably never experienced a floppy disk. So there are paradigms and best practices that for sure ought to be considered. Hotjar is what is often called or is known as a session recording tool. So it allows you to see users as they browse the site. And these can be super valuable for uncovering UX pain points, uncovering the ways in which your site is being used just through anonymous traffic. And those as well can come with a performance downside, because like I mentioned a minute ago, the browser can only do one thing at a time. And if one of those things is recording all of the interactions, then it needs to give the user time to perform the actions that they want to perform. So even in trying to observe something very Jane Goodall, right? Like trying to watch it, we are inherently changing the experience. So I would, there's tons of data that you can learn from tools like Hotjar, but I've also seen scenarios where Hotjar, or not to point fingers at Hotjar specifically, but session recording, anything with heavy client side processing like that can have a performance impact and ought to be used strategically. So I'm not saying don't use it at all. I'm saying use it to uncover a set of hypotheses that you may want to validate, turn it off, make your changes, turn it back on, validate. It's like a periodic thing, or use it for a segment of your traffic, not for all of your users. There's ways around just sort of bombing everyone with that penalty, that site speed penalty. Not to say you shouldn't have done so. I think you're at the stage and I'm at the stage where our website.
Yeah, I was, I don't know, not early adopter. I was learning phase. Totally. Like, anybody who was telling me is like, really? People would click on that? Yeah. And it's like, everybody's clicking on it. I'm like, okay, I'm embarrassed now. What do I know? Right? Like, what do I know? I had no idea. Right. But that's the thing. Like, that's why they, somebody hires someone like you, who's a professional that kind of already knows the general expectation of user experience. Mm-hmm. And to kind of give the listeners an idea of what happened. About 7 months ago, I actually had a company contact me and said, hey, we specialize in WooCommerce and we want to help you with your user experience. And these guys came, they did an amazing presentation and everything. It was by far, I usually don't even respond to anybody on that whole, we'll correct your SEO and all that, because I get like 5 emails a day. But the way they did it, they actually did a Loom video recording showing me pain points and errors on certain parts of the website. And I was like, okay, well, I should at least listen to these guys. So then they came back with this price of like $15,000. And I'm like, whoa. So I do know for a lot of companies, it's not a big deal to pay $15,000 if you're doing a few million a year. But for me, being a new business, it didn't make sense at that point in time, right?
Sure.
However, but that's kind of that. Is that kind of like stuff that you would do? Like you would go and you'd fix the UX, correct? That's the kind of stuff.
Similar. I would say performance is an aspect of user experience, and I wouldn't call SpeedSense a user experience design consultancy.
Okay.
I've had experience in that role in the past. Early in my career, UI and UX and front end were all kind of blended together. And even like I was a Java developer, but I was building front end code because web apps at the time were constructed a lot differently than they are today. So yeah, I've got a lot of experience in that world, and we do end up making recommendations, but often our clients would have an in-house UX expert already, or a marketing agency or design agency that contributes to UX in that way. But yeah, so a couple of things you touch on there. One of the problems with UX or with performance in general is I don't know where I ought to be. Like, you didn't know that the button, that element should be clickable or should be styled differently if it isn't clickable. And so for us, a lot of the complexity around site speed is brands don't really know how big a problem it is at all. Just, we don't know where we are. We don't know where our competitors are in terms of site speed. We don't know what the user's expectation is. And fortunately for the user, and unfortunately for many companies, the expectations are set by the fastest. So, Amazon, Walmart, the behemoths of the shopping world, if we're using e-commerce as an example, but say it's even video. Like if you're going to spin off another video service, you need to be as feature rich and performant as YouTube and Vimeo and TikTok. And, the expectation is set by the existing market leaders. And so that is typically who we aspire or help our clients set their targets against that. Again, nobody really needs to be the fastest website in the world, though. You just need to be as fast as your cohort, your competitors, and past the core web vitals metrics is plenty. Because this is the kind of thing where you could spend an infinite amount of money. And so what we often do is help our clients build a model between, if we're going to increase our first contentful paint time by 10 milliseconds, what does that turn into in terms of conversion rate? So that boosts conversion by 1%, by 0.1%, by 10%, so that they can see, okay, maybe it's going to cost us $50,000 to make that performance change because it's a significant effort. But maybe that $50,000 is going to be made back 10 times. And so it's very clear for them to make that investment. And at some point, that becomes an effort of diminishing returns. Like, you can't have the fastest website on the internet. I mean, you could, but it's not in most companies' best interest. It'd be more like a tech demo than a business.
So is there something that maybe you would like to talk about regarding the user experience, like something you would like to kind of address to everybody? Or
that's a good question. I think in terms of site speed and UX, I think a lot about how it relates to a couple of things: accessibility and carbon. And I know those sound like weird segues, but so the speed of your website, or the speed as one metric of UX, because there's a ton of UX we could go into, but this is just my world. So I mean, I'm kind of obsessed with it. But imagine I was camping this weekend near Squamish. Imagine you're on your cell phone in the forest and you're trying to get the weather. The network and the device and potentially your battery level, lots of things are working against you there to deliver a really performant experience. So it may be that your CPU is throttled because your battery is low. It might be that you're on 3G. So what I'm getting at here is there is no one individual speed for a website. It's a distribution of all of the devices that visit it, all of the networks that they browse. And when you're designing for anything performant or any UX at all, my recommendation in our typical workflow is always work with the most constraints. Like, if so mobile first was a web design philosophy for many years, where when the world went from desktop website and mobile website as two different, well, first of all, we'll talk about the introduction of the iPhone. There was the internet, and then the iPhone came along and made the internet portable. And then brands started to build a specific like safedrivesolutions.ca website, which was the mobile version of their desktop site. Those were sort of difficult to maintain. You could design a more optimal experience for the device class and the viewport and the type of input. Like, you got touch input and you can do different gestures like swiping and zooming and things. But over the course of the next few years, there was a transition toward responsive web. So one set of templates that's flexible and works across all screen sizes. So instead of like a tablet site and a phone site and a desktop site, you've got just your website, and it's flexible or fluid, a responsive web design. That was that philosophy. And then one of the troubles that came up was it was really hard to smush that desktop experience onto mobile and just have it work. So a philosophy that evolved was to design with the most constraints first. So if you can solve the problem on a tiny little screen on a really crappy network with an underpowered CPU, then if you scale all of that up, the experience will for sure be addressed and will only get better. So instead of trying to cram a really rich experience into a mobile device, design with the primary goal of the page in mind, and then on the smallest viewport, on the worst network, so small payloads, and then from there everything gets better. So when we address performance, we do so through the lens of mobile first, because typically you've got a more constrained CPU and a more constrained network, though the latter there, the network may be changing very drastically as 5G gets rolled out. But still, for the general population globally, wireless infrastructure is not as performant as wires infrastructure. So that would be my first thing there. And then accessibility, that sort of ties into that distribution. At some point, I might get annoyed that I clicked on an ad and it took 70 seconds to see the shoes or whatever I was looking at. But if you're in if I was in Squamish and we were, well, the Rogers outage was also this week. So we'll talk about like the fact that the whole network was down.
What? Oh yeah, I had like nothing for a few days. It was brutal.
Yeah, and a lot of brands suffered greatly, and like people couldn't travel and things. So there's a point. I guess we use that as an example. Yeah, there's a point at which network instability or unavailability is no longer necessarily just frustrating, but now it's potentially risky. Like people couldn't call 911, and that's not about performance anymore. I mean, it is because it's down. The worst version of a website is the one that doesn't respond at all. And I know I'm conflating calling and websites, but the same idea. You know, we'll
That's
let
a
it slide for
poor.
now.
It's a poor user experience. Like we're paying for emergency 911. You can't call 911. Like you should be able to call 911 no matter what.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
like that's
So,
my opinion. That's crazy, right? Like,
for sure. Yeah. There's a point at which it gets so the performance gets so poor that the service is no longer usable. And then sometimes those are mission critical services. Or, if it were Wikipedia, imagine Wikipedia were down in all of Europe for a month. Like access to the world's information is no longer about how fast can we sell a dash cam, how much frustration is there when someone visits Amazon.com to get something, a new microphone. There's degrees of performance that we should be willing to tolerate, and those that should be table stakes for all users.
yeah, I mean, we obviously both come from a time when there was dial up and you'd sit in front of the computer and it would do the like a little dial tone and you're waiting and like 5 minutes
Your
later
mom
you're,
would pick up the
you're on the
phone.
internet, right? You're like, mom, put down the phone, right? I'm on the internet,
Yeah,
right?
man.
And you had Napster and free music, but everything was like really slow. And now our user experience, we've gone from, I don't even remember what is it, HSPA or something like that. It's gone from like that to now we're like 4G, 5G, like everything's so fast that when
Yeah.
it takes so long now, it ruins our user experience because we have an expectation to be this fast and for to load and have our information at our fingertips. I mean, like one of my friends was telling a story recently about how, for many years he had encyclopedias. I guess I haven't looked at those things in 20 years or something now, right? Because the internet, like everything's pretty much there, right? There's so many things. I mean, you still need to make you need to tread softly on what is true and what isn't. Just because it's on the internet doesn't mean it's true. But yeah, Wikipedia, a lot of really good information is on there. It's very much the online encyclopedia.
Yeah. There's a good comedian's got a good bit about how quickly we feel entitled to something we just discovered. And when you talk about networks evolving over time, he was talking about using Wi-Fi on an airplane, and it went down, and the guy sitting next to him was like, "Oh, this is garbage." He's like, "How quickly you feel entitled to this thing that didn't exist 5 minutes ago?" And so, yeah, you're right. The pace at which we adopt things, this like hedonic adaptation, we expect it to be the new norm. It's cripplingly fast, and it's not great for stifling our desires, for sure.
Yeah. Do you have any, I guess, final words of wisdom?
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So if you want to nerd out on site speed, pagespeed.web.dev is a handy little link that people could pop their URL into. This is a Google powered tool. If you run a website, and it'll show you, how long it takes for your site to load for your traffic. And that's pretty handy. I can be reached at speedsense.com, or you can follow me on LinkedIn. Yeah, I share a lot of information about, site speed and these kinds of topics. So happy to chat with anybody that wants to nerd out, like I say, on site speed.
Yeah. And if you are looking for this kind of information, I mean, right on speedsense.com, you can book a free 30-minute consultation.
Yep. Yeah. Happy to chat with whoever needs it.
So I appreciate you for coming on today and sharing your knowledge.
Yeah, man. It's great to be here. Appreciate the chat.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Focus on Customer Experience podcast. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. For more information or to connect with Ben, check out Benjamin Del Grosso on LinkedIn, at Safe Drive Solutions on Instagram, or www.safedrivesolutions.ca online. We'll see you next time.